Hopefully this video will give you a good introduction to pixels and the Falcon PiCap, and this will set you on your way to bigger and brighter Christmas displays. I'm calling this the Hello World example. So this is what we'll be doing in the video to try to get you going to end here. Now you might be familiar with these lights you might get from Home Depot or Lowe's, but we're not going to be using these. These are analog lights, the old way of doing things here. What we're going to do is we're going to step up our game and use a new version of Christmas lights. Now these are called pixels. They come in 5 volt and 12 volt versions, but we're going to be using the 12 volt version for this example, and it's got 3 LEDs inside there. And what makes these specials is there's a special little microchip in there. The microchip in there is called a 2811, and that's what makes these special. As you can see, here's the data sheet. And so you're going to want to make sure that when you get a string of lights, it's going to be using this integrated circuit, and this is what we'll be using here in the example. Now at the end of these wires are these waterproof plugs. These aren't going to plug directly into our board, so what we'll need to do is get a pigtail so you can see where the one end where we can hook it up. Now here on the left is the Falcon PiCap, and here on the right is the Raspberry Pi. You can get the Raspberry Pis at Micro Center or Adafruit, lots of Amazon, but to get the PiCap you're going to have to go to Pixel Controller, and we're going to need a power supply. This is a waterproof power supply. It's a rather small power supply. It's only 45 watts. And the final thing we'll need is an SD card to store the operating system. So here's the Raspberry Pi I'm going to be using. It's a Model 3 B+. And I just got the Falcon PiCap, and here are some spacers. So now let's take a look at the board. We're going to be ignoring the spot on the lower right hand side on this video and focusing on the rest of the board here. So we're going to hook up our 12 volt power supply. We're going to need to configure the power settings for the supply. We can use a battery for a real-time clock. And here is where we're going to plug in our lights. It supports 2 strands of lights. And we're going to now jump into our configuration of the power. So if we flip this over on the back, you can see depending on our input voltage what pins should be jumpered. And this jumper up at the top here, this power Pi jumper, this will supply power to our Raspberry Pi, so we don't need to supply power via a USB port. So next thing to do is to assemble the hat on top of the Pi, and it comes with these spacers. And so you just put the spacer in and put the screw through, attach them, and tighten them up here. Now when I was reviewing some documentation and some videos, I noticed that there was this way of doing it, and these screws stick out the bottom, and someone else had actually put in the screws from the bottom up, and the extra was sticking out the top of the board. And I thought this was a more interesting approach, so I'm going to go with this one. But leave your comments below. I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on this style of attaching the hat. So you can see the bottom is much cleaner, and you've got the screws pointing up out of the board. Now when you're hooking up the power supply, make sure that you pay attention to the ground and the voltage, the input here. So what we're going to do is take off these caps here, the one for the power, and we're going to actually take off the one for the lights too to make it easier to work with. So these are Phoenix connectors, and here's our power supply. So we're going to hook it up to the one that has the 2 inputs. And again, we got to pay careful attention to our color coding. We don't want to reverse the polarity on these. So tighten it up, give it a little tug, make sure it's correct. And so here we have the pigtail that we had earlier. Again, we want to line up our ground being the black wire. Now if you notice, this one has a yellow wire. The yellow wire is for the data, and that's what gives us how all the pixels are controlled individually, so that's key. So now let's plug these in here, and And let's just double check that the wiring lines up to what we expect. Again, the ground should be the blacks, and the D there is for the data, and the red is for the power line there. So looks good. Now we need to get the software. So you got to go over to the Falcon Christmas GitHub and look for the Falcon Player, and then go to the releases and scroll down until you see a zip file that you can download. We're going to be looking for one for the Raspberry Pi. So we're going to click download this file, and when we get done downloading it, on Windows you're going to use you can use Win32 Disk Imager. On a Mac you're going to use different software, but there's lots of videos on how to take an image file and move it to an SD card. So I'll leave that up to you to find out specifics or for your setup there. So now that we've put the operating system on the SD card, it's time to put everything together. So we're going to take the SD card, plug that into the Raspberry Pi. You can see the slot is underneath the Pi. We're just going to stick it in there. It's just a little 16 gigabyte card. And now we'll plug in our pigtail to our actual lights. You can see this is a waterproof connector, so if we were going to put this outside, this is a nice thing. There's this little ring there, and we tighten it up, so that would give us a good, hopefully waterproof connection. And now the last thing to do is we got to plug in the Ethernet. So this is we're going to plug this into the Pi. So this is how we'll connect to the little website that's running on here. So that's how we're going to interface and control the lights, is through a simple web page. And so finally, cross our fingers, plug it in, and we have power. Things are lighting up, so things are looking good. You can look at the LEDs on the Pi player and on the PiCap there. So now let's go over to the website. So we're going to just type in FPP in the browser, and that should bring us to the web page. So first thing we want to do is grow the file system, and we're going to have to reboot after that. And this will just make sure we're using all 16 gigs in our SD card. Now we're going to configure the outputs. So you can see your channel outputs. We're going to be using the pixel strings. We're going to add an output, type in the description here, and we're going to put in 50 pixels because that's what our string is. And we should be able to save this, and that's going to require a restart. And after it restarts, we're going to go now down to display testing, and we're going to set our channel range. So we've got 150 channels, and we're going to enable the test mode. So now our pixels should be flashing, and here's a little demo of changing the individual colors using the sliders down below. And we've got a kilowatt meter hooked up here to show you some of the wattage being used. It's kind of hard to read, I know, because the lights are throwing off the camera, but you can see the wattage is used by the different colors on the side here. So hopefully that helps you out. So and then we can just turn off the test mode. If you need pixels or various equipment, here are some websites where you can order from. For further information, or if you get stuck or have problems, check out these forums. There are a lot of great people there willing to help and share ideas. I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, check the comments below for corrections or to add some clarity to this video. Thanks again.